Janine. I'm the graduate assistant for Campus Life. I work with Ivy Siegel Mack, who, well, on my screen, she's right below me. So she's waving. And we create life skills series, and just like this one for students. So today we're going to have Love at First Swipe. It's going to be presented by Kathleen and Sarah, who are clinicians at CAPS. There will be, of course, the pre-survey in the chat and then a post survey. So please make sure to fill out both. And just to give you a heads up, this will be recorded so that we can put it on our YouTube channel. All right, Sarah and Kathleen, go ahead.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm Kathleen, and it was said that we're clinicians at CAPS, and there are locations on both the MMC and BDC campus, and we'll talk more about those services later on in the presentation. But yeah, if you can please do that pre-survey, it'll be very helpful. And then just a little bit about the services, and if you want, you can take a screenshot or take a picture on your phone of this slide where we have phone numbers. So VEP and CAPS, so VEP stands for the Victim Empowerment Program, and CAPS is the Counseling and Psychological Services. And like I said, we have locations at both campuses, and here are the numbers. And then we also have a 24-hour line, so there's always a clinician on call. And you can also find us online, and here's the link.
I have to remember to unmute. Okay, so I'm Sarah, by the way. I just wanted to say hello and thank you so much for having us. So we're gonna get started. So back in the day with dating, there were a lot of gender roles and norms that were in place, and there were also like a lot of face-to-face dating expectations, like knocking on the door, maybe meeting your family, the man paying for the meal, holding the door, or opening the car door for you. And then following the date, not calling for a couple of days to, wait and see and kind of like build up some feelings. So that's, as we know, is very different from online dating. And so let's talk about like what those differences are and what that involves. Um, so currently, there are 50% of college students that use online dating apps. And of that 50%, 83% then engage in a face-to-face meeting. And being able to use a dating app allows you to see like the whole pool essentially of people around you rather than those that are perhaps just in your immediate circle. So it can really help with like trying to find somebody that has similar interests as you. There are also different purposes of why people might use an online dating platform or application. So sometimes it might be to find or foster a new friendship. Sometimes it might be for casual dating or like for a hookup or sex. And so some of those apps are, Tinder, Bumble, Pure, Coffee Meets Bagel, and Grindr. And then there are some apps or websites that are more for seeking long-term relationships. So like The Catch, Dapper, Match.com, and The League. So just kind of keeping in mind the parallel that goes with each app as it's a little bit different.
All right, so virtual etiquette. So like Sarah was explaining, some of these apps and websites have different intentions or purposes for the users. And so you might want to do some research talking to others that are using these apps or websites or looking online to get a better idea of what's the purpose. Because if you're looking for something long term, you may not want to be on one of the apps that focuses more on just like hooking up. And while you're also considering like the usage of the app, this would also lead to being more mindful of the types of conversations that you're having or what it is that you're sending. So for example, for some of the apps, sending any type of photo, it might seem like not the right type of vibe, for what it is that's expected. And then when it comes to particularly explicit photos, one thing that we recommend is to first ask before sending any type of photo. Particularly if you're on like a certain app that's not related to like hooking up in particular and more for long term, like that might be, even more so a turn off for the other person if it's brought on by like very much as a surprise versus something that's asked or offered before receiving it. And be honest with what it is that you're looking for. So if you're looking for something short term or non-committal, like be honest with yourself in terms of the type of app that you're using, as well as what it is that you're relaying to the people that you're chatting with. This will help you in having a more authentic and more enjoyable experience with online dating. The same goes with being real with how you advertise yourself, right? And so this could relate to the photos that you post or the information that you have on your profile. Try to just be like your real self and be mindful of your selections. And so, for some people, they might, swipe right for everyone, or they're very picky. And trying to find that middle ground of what works best for you, and what is really what you're looking for. And so you don't want to try and have connections with others where you're not really as interested, because this could lead to a letdown for yourself or for the other person. And with that in mind, also being able to take rejections, right? In all types of dating, rejections happen. And when it comes to online dating in particular, the other person may have not really gotten to know you very well. Either you all never really communicated or they just didn't swipe right. And just remembering that they didn't get to know the real you. And maybe that might help in having that perspective in terms of like how you might take that rejection or just that missed opportunity with that person. And just in general, do to others what you would want them to do to you. And so like an example could be looping back to like sending photos. For some, they might find it really strange to get photos of like fun activities that you're doing or the food that you're eating, whereas for others, they might find that more enjoyable. So just kind of feeling it out and thinking, what is it that you would want from the other person? So online dating etiquette. So a lot of different questions come up, right? How much texting is too much? Is it okay to start sending pictures or video chatting? And how long should you wait before you meet in person? So a lot of these questions are also like pre-pandemic, and we will go over more like dating during the pandemic later on in this presentation. So a lot of this just comes down to how do you feel, like what feels right for you, and talking to the other person. So like I said, asking, is it okay to send some sort of picture, and talking to the other person, right? Like, is it something like comfortable for both of you to meet in person? How long? Like, do they usually wait after messaging for a certain amount of time? Do you normally wait until you've had, other types of communication with them? Just talking to the other person, feeling it out. Online safety. So it's important to remember that you're in control of your online profile, meaning you get to decide what pictures you put, what information you have, and who you connect with to some degree, right? You can decide if you're going to, if you're going to swipe right, if you're going to match with that person, accept the match. And you can always delete any kind of match that you're not interested in. And remembering to be aware of sending money and financial information. And so a lot of this might sound like things that your parents or grandparents may have warned you about in terms of communicating with anyone online. But we're thinking more about like being connected through Zelle or Venmo, right? So when you're connecting with someone you don't know in this way, it's still connecting through your bank information. So keeping in mind, who do you want to have those connections with, and who do you want to like disconnect from? Right? Going through your Venmo and deleting contacts, and protecting your personal information in general. And so some of the websites or apps will ask for personal questions such as your favorite food, but remember that for a lot of other websites that you have, those can be like your security questions. So keeping in mind to have different information for that so that someone doesn't manipulate your information and use that to take advantage of your finances or other personal information. And to remember like other information that you really wouldn't want to give out. So that would include things like social security number, credit card number, your home or work address, or personal phone numbers if you're not ready for that. And just overall being web-wise, right? So consider the pros and cons of giving permission for other social media platforms. A lot of the dating apps have you connected through your social media, right? So if you might be friends with them on Facebook or Instagram, things like that, because it helps you find connections remember, who else are you connected to on those social media platforms? Does your boss or a parent of yours, a family member, are they able to see that connection? Do you want them to know that you're online dating? It might not be an issue for you, but to just consider these things. And also with regards to geolocation. So that's where an app will help you decide, like, is someone in your area? That can help you know if like this is a person in your area, therefore it might make sense to date them. But do you feel comfortable having someone know at all times, like roughly where you are, or if you connect with them on something like Snapchat, where they could also have access to your location at a given time? So like I had mentioned before, you want to make sure that you're honest with yourself and with others when you're trying to figure out who you want to connect with more, continue talking to, having realistic standards and being open-minded. In many cases, we might have like boxes that we're looking to check, but seeing, is there options outside of those boxes? And setting realistic goals, try not to force it or fake it, and go with your gut. And so if there's something that just doesn't feel right, if you feel uncomfortable, you can always delete the match, right? And at the different apps and websites have different ways that they manage that, but you're always able to disconnect any kind of communication. And that's another reason that it might be helpful to stay with all of your communication on the app, because otherwise, if you're already exchanging phone numbers or social media contacts, then it's more platforms where you might have to delete communication. In-person and online safety. You want to get to know the other person. And so that makes it harder when somebody doesn't really have any pictures on their profile. That's a little bit suspicious, right? It's like a red flag. Like, what does that mean if they don't have pictures of themselves? Some apps, such as Grindr, it's really common to see photos that just show their abs, right? No face. And it makes it harder to know, like, who is this person, and get to know them in a different way. And whenever you are considering meeting up with someone, you want to try and stay in a public setting. The reason for this is because there's more accountability if there's others around you. And so I know this might make it a little bit more complicated right now, given like the pandemic and different changes that keep happening. But thinking about things like going to a coffee shop, if you're old enough, going to a bar, meeting up at a park, because there's others around that can kind of be there in case like something happens, right? If you needed to get help for any reason. And anytime you are meeting up with someone, you want to make sure you bring your cell phone and that it's fully charged. For some, they might feel comfortable sharing their date information with a close family member or friend, letting them know like, hey, I'm going out with this person. Here's a picture of their profile. We're meeting up at Starbucks tomorrow at this time. And you can even go an extra mile into sharing your location with your best friend, let's just say, giving them that information. And then they can see if you're really still at the location that you said. You can always deactivate that after the date if you wanted. And whenever you're going out to meet a person, make sure you're transporting yourself. You don't want to rely on the other person. You don't want to be in any kind of situation where you don't feel like you have control. So that comes into the topic of staying sober, which I know can get a little bit complicated in terms of like how a lot of these dates are. Often for those who are old enough to go to bars, that's how often a lot of dates are, to go out for drinks, because it's not a long period of time that you're committing to seeing this person. And trying to remember that when you're intoxicated, it makes it harder for you to notice those red flags, to be more aware and in control. And we'll talk more about that in a couple of slides.
Okay, so now we're going to discuss a little bit of the more difficult sides of online dating, perhaps a little bit of the riskier part of online dating. So emotional attachment can be very, very quick when you're perhaps texting through the app all day, or if you guys were to exchange phone numbers and then maybe you're like texting for a long period of time. And that can lead to increased vulnerability, right? When you're talking to somebody for a long time, you want to share more of yourself and who you are, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And it's important to be mindful of emotional words that you might be using and your use of self disclosure, particularly if you're noticing any of those red flags. Um, Now, the other side of this, which Kathy just began to touch on, with staying sober, is that there is a increased risk of such sexual assault when you are engaging in online dating, and the biggest predictor of sexual assault is alcohol use. Um, and some of that can sometimes go along with like the hookup culture where being on those certain apps that we were discussing before that are more inclined for hookups, people might be entering those dates with like certain expectations. And then if you're meeting at the bar and having some drinks, things can escalate in a way that you weren't necessarily intending. So as I was just saying, alcohol use is the #1 drug linked to predatory behavior, and it's also classified as a depressant. So that means it's a downer and it impairs your inhibitions and your judgment and really increases your vulnerability to that other individual in person. It can make it a lot harder for you to be able to say no or to even give consent. Uh, it can also lead to blackouts and memory loss, where you could very well have been taken advantage of and you're not aware of what had happened. Um, Additionally, if you are meeting at the bar, other drugs can be added to your alcoholic beverages, and that can compound the effect of already having a few drinks. So just keeping in mind that that is a little bit of a risk factor to take into consideration when you might be meeting somebody for the first couple of times or beyond. So here are some safe drinking tips to keep in mind, because obviously you all are young and it's fun to go out. Things are finally reopening here. So let's talk about how we can do that safely. So whether you're at a party or you're at a club or you're at a bar, make sure that you are watching your drink at all times and keeping it covered. So I know like you don't always get a lid when you're out, but you can hold your cup like this and your hand is covering your drink, right? And you can still sip out of it with a straw. You also, if it's more of like a smaller like party with people maybe that are your friends or people you don't directly know, avoid drinking from the punch bowl. You have no idea what's in that jungle juice, and so really being mindful of what could be in there. It's also important that you check in with your friends. If you brought some of your guy friends or you brought some of your girlfriends, let them know where you are. If you're going to go somewhere else or maybe go to hang out to a different spot, keep them in the loop. And then also, if you are at a particular bar setting, watch the bartender make your drink. Or if somebody offers to buy you a drink, go with them to get it so that you're seeing it being made and you're taking it directly from the server. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the expectations versus reality piece. Is this the same person that you thought that you were meeting online? Or is this maybe more of a catfish situation? So there are some specific research and like statistics out there regarding both men and women and the things that they're more likely to lie about or inflate. So men, for example, are more likely to self-inflate when they're expecting a date. They'll try to enhance their status and they'll also lie about their height. And this kind of goes back to Kathy's point about being open-minded, right? I know for women, sometimes we might have in our head, I want a man that is 6'1", right? But if that guy's actually 5'10", that might be like a total turn off. But in reality, it's a few inches. So maybe trying to be that open-minded piece. And then women are more likely to inflate their physical attractiveness, you know, perhaps like with makeup or like accentuating certain features. And they're also more likely to lie about their weight. So just thinking about who are you, when you're meeting that person in real life, is this who I expected? Or is this totally different? Is this a red flag? Do I feel safe or not? So some things to keep in mind.
All right, health. So you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself. At the Healthy Living Program in the Student Health Center in room 180, They provide HIV testing and free condoms. Condoms can significantly reduce the risk of contracting or passing an STI. Please keep in mind, though, that you can still get some STIs despite wearing a condom, such as herpes or HPV. But it's still a really good, thing to have to help protect yourself and to protect the other person. And you want to make sure that you're open and honest with the other person, right? And so, in terms of what types of information you could share with the other person, such as like your STI status, how often or when was the last time that you got tested, making sure that you are knowing your status in terms of STI. And this can also go into the conversation of COVID-19 as well, which, like I said, we'll talk about later on. And making sure that you feel comfortable when having these conversations, right? There's never a bad time to want to bring up any of these topics. It's fair game to also ask about how many partners the other person has had, being mindful that you may be asked to share the same information. And when was the last time that you did have sex? Oh, and then also, just as like a last bit, to remember that some STIs don't show symptoms, and keeping that in mind so that you're still getting tested regularly. So like I mentioned before, the Healthy Living Program offers a lot of different things I have listed here. It's a really great resource to have on campus. So they have one-on-one free consultations relating to sexual health, sleep hygiene, tobacco dependence, and more. Like I mentioned, free HIV counseling and testing, safer sex materials. And then as an aside, they also have acupuncture, massages, aromatherapy. Overall, Healthy Living is a great resource. Highly recommend you all check it out if you haven't already.
So now we're going to transition to specifically talking about online dating during this COVID-19 pandemic, because that's certainly an added factor here in meeting up with someone you haven't met before. So just to give a little bit of information, 1 in 4 young adults broke quarantine in April for a sexual encounter. And I think, as we all know, that was like the heightened point of the stay-at-home orders. So that's saying a lot. Like, we want to have connections, right? Like, no, and be able to meet people and not have to stay home. It's hard to stay home and perhaps be stuck with family and things like that. But so in that spirit, it's important that you're expressing your personal needs and wants. And some online dating apps have made some changes in that way. So on Bumble, for example, you can select a badge for dates that you feel comfortable with. So you can say, like, you can have a badge for like socially distanced dates are okay, or like dates where we wear masks is okay, or like virtual only is okay. And then a different dating app called Lex also added an option where you can share your COVID-19 status or like your antibody test results. And this topic overall, with COVID, kind of requires some candid conversation, just in the keeping in mind that people may have high risk family members at home, and those are things that you might not know like right off the bat. Or like that person may be an essential worker and is like at a hospital or around small children all day, and that could be a concern for you on the other end, let's say. And just knowing that sharing these things is certainly at your discretion, just how everything else is with your pictures and your profile information. So let's talk some more about dating and COVID. It's important that you try your best not to make any assumptions. Your idea of what socially distanced means and another person's idea of what socially distanced means may be two totally different things. So like I could be okay with eating outside at a restaurant, but maybe Kathy would prefer to have a picnic in the park 6 feet apart, right? That's very different with the number of people that might be around. Also, like if you're scheduling like video chatting or dating, keep in mind that a lot of people might be experiencing Zoom fatigue right now. I know y'all as students and me as a FIU employee, I spend all day on the computer, and that can be exhausting. You don't always want to video chat with somebody after that, even if you're really looking forward to it. So that's certainly like a different thing than meeting in person with a virtual piece. And then kind of knowing for yourself, do you want to share your COVID-19 status? Do you want to say that you had it before, or that you've been tested and it's negative? You know, those are things to think about, and whether or not you're willing to share. It's also important to be patient, because of all those factors, right? Zoom fatigue, maybe having high risk family in the home, um, the stress of functioning in a pandemic. It might be harder to meet up in person than it was before. And, you know, consider the benefits of virtual dates, and how that might allow you all to get to know one another while also like maintaining safety at this time. So now we're going to talk about, like, you know, what if you do meet up? What might that look like? How could you make sure that you're doing that in a way that feels like safe and comfortable for you and for the other person? So it's recommended by the research that you embrace the mask, because that blocks the transmission of basically germs on the whole and protects you from, um, you know, breathing in or like getting that germ. It can also be very good to meet outside and remember that you're biased in your own risk assessment. Um, you know, me, for example, I'm sitting here, I don't think that I have COVID, but I could be an asymptomatic carrier and I have no idea, right? So keeping that in mind when you are considering meeting up with another person, that we are biased in whether or not we think that we're ill or not. This kind of conversation also requires assertive communication and maybe even using some um, nonverbal communication. So um, you know, perhaps how close or how far away are you sitting? You know, does your date keep scooting away from you because you keep scooting closer? Um, is it comfortable to hug or not hug? Is it comfortable to hold hands or not hold hands? So really being assertive and saying, I feel comfortable with this and I don't feel comfortable with that. Um, if you are considering getting physical in any way, consider phone or video sex. You know, obviously not quite the same, but it still is a way of being more intimate in a way that's safer at this time. And if you're considering meeting up in person for a sexual encounter or hookup, um, consider asking the other person, and when might be like a good time for them or when they might feel comfortable. So you can ask before ever meeting up in person, um, to share your boundaries and to ask the other person to share their boundaries and their expectations.
All right, so what have we discussed in this presentation? We talked about online dating, so virtual and online dating etiquette, online safety, in-person safety, and that includes information such as a safety plan and alcohol use, and then dating during the pandemic, so knowing your status, open communication, flexibility, and health safety. We do have a couple of more slides where we talk about the different resources that we offer at CAPS and VEP, but we do have a post survey, a post presentation survey that we would like for all of you to fill out, and it helps us get a better idea of how we're doing and things that we can do to improve for future presentations. So if you can just hang tight, we're going to still talk about some other things, and feel free to use your phone and take pictures of the slides if you're interested in any of this information. So for further help and support, we have different numbers here. As I mentioned, CAPS and VEP. So that's where we work. And so VEP is the first one here, the Victim Empowerment Program. And here's a phone number and an email address. We also have here the information for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Hotline, the Planned Parenthood number and address, and the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And also, if you're considering sending any of this information out to others, most, if not all, offer some callers that can speak in Spanish. And so just to keep that in mind, and for some of the national ones, there may have more language opportunities as well. And so what is CAPS, right? And so CAPS, as I mentioned before, is the counseling and psychological services that is offered at both the MMC and BBC campus. It's confidential services that includes Cognito, which is this really fun and helpful simulator we have online that helps you if you need to have a difficult conversation with a friend or family member. And so if you know someone that needs help, but you're not really sure how to point them in the right direction or how to have that conversation, Cognito gives you the option of simulating that situation, that encounter, in a safe and helpful way. We also have online self-help modules and screenings. So some of those screenings include like alcohol use, disordered eating, and depression screeners. And then we also have therapy assisted online, which is TAO. So for any of you who are currently using our CAP services for therapy or are interested, this is where you'll have access to all sorts of things, including our video conferencing, which is what we're offering right now in most circumstances at CAPS. And then we also offer different modules through TAO. It's a really helpful tool to use. And then I mentioned therapy. So we offer individual, couples, and group counseling. Just as a clarifier for couples, both members of the couple have to be a current student at FIU. And then we also offer consultations, evaluations, and referrals. And we do have testing, but be mindful that for some, there may be additional charges. And so this testing can also be done virtually. It's a new thing that we're offering at the moment. And then psychiatric services. So you can get medication through CAPS, have appointments with psychiatrists for medication management and medication evaluations. And then we do have podcasts available online. And the podcasts that we have right now are Men in Therapy, Sleep Hygiene, and Anxiety. And so I mentioned VAP, that's the Victim Empowerment Program. And so this is confidential assistance to FIU students who have been victimized through threatened or actual violence involving sexual assault, relationship abuse, stalking, hazing, hate crimes, and other violent crimes. So if you were to meet with one of the VEP clinicians, they can help you in explaining your choices, identifying needs and options, accompaniment, such as like if you needed to go to somewhere in person or virtually, they might be able to help you and go along with you in order to follow through on what it is that like your goals are in going to VEP, counseling, and safety planning. And so